Yeah, you really need to.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maira Ansari here with Troubleshooter Natalia Martinez. We are talking a little bit more in depth today about this civil lawsuit that we told you about yesterday that involves the victims of the Old National Bank shooting. Today, we brought you that press conference with the attorneys live on a wave today that happened at 10 o'clock. And we just wanted to further talk about this and kind of what this means for the community, what it means for the victims. Natalia has been following this so closely. First, kind of break down, Natalia, what you learned yesterday and what you told folks.
Okay, so this is an approach that honestly we didn't know about or expect when the mass shooting first happened in April of 2023. So what a group of attorneys have all gotten together. First, it was local Louisville attorney Tad Thomas and his law office who started talking to the victims of the mass shooting, the loved ones, and then also people who were shot. There were several people that were shot.
And survived.
So it's taken 9 months, but Tad's law office has now teamed up with a law office in Chicago that does have a lot of experience in lawsuits related to mass shootings. They have also teamed up with Everytown, which is a group of attorneys that also only deal with mass shootings, and they're a team of lawyers. And so those three have now gotten together to represent some of the victims. 2 more attorneys jumped in today to represent 2 other victims separately, but it's still kind of the same approach. So what's happening is they are suing the gun store that sold the gun and other accessories to the mass shooter that went into the Old National Bank, killed 5 people, injured several others.
And this is a little bit different. Was this kind of expected that something like this would happen? Lawsuits often happen in mass tragedies, but did we expect them to go after the gun shop, River City Firearms?
No, we've seen lawsuits in the past where they've targeted or they filed against the gun manufacturer for the way that these weapons are marketed. But in this case, this didn't really come about until after they started learning more about the gun shop. And so what the lawsuit alleges is that the shooter went into the store and was acting incredibly strange.
Yes.
Right. And so a witness came forward, a lady who was there, she was a customer, and noticed that a young man wasn't making eye contact, was lowering his head, was
Speaking
avoiding
very low.
Yeah, was avoiding people, didn't know. He just said, I want an AR, didn't know what he was asking for, didn't know anything about the weapon.
He said something to the effect that he wanted it for home protection, correct?
Yes.
And so that's not a typical weapon that you use for home protection.
No, he said that his friend's home had been burglarized and he wanted self-protection, right? So imagine, an AR style rifle requires 2 hands. They're heavier, right? They're harder to control because of the power that they harness. And so if you want home protection, you would use, a different kind of weapon. You wouldn't use something so cumbersome. Also, he didn't know how to use it. This witness said that she that the store clerk had to show him very basic functions, how to load it and how to operate it. And so she thought it was so strange.
She noticed it.
She noticed it.
And for those that don't know, that gun stores, they have a responsibility in being the first line of defense and kind of fishing out and weeding out something doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
And the suit claims that River City Firearms failed to do so when they sold the shooter that gun on April 4th, just 6 days before the shooting.
Yes. And so when I first read the lawsuit, we were aware of it. We couldn't report it yet, but we were aware of it. And when I first read it, automatically I thought, well, what are people who are Second Amendment, proponents? Their initial reaction, I would guess, would be, well, what's the threshold? How is a gun store owner supposed to know whether
Somebody's mental stability.
Right. But the lawsuit makes it clear that it's not subjective, that this is an obligation that gun store owners and firearms dealers are required to do by law. So it's not, they receive specific training on what to look for.
They are supposed to look out for red flags. They know what to, as you mentioned, know what to look for, know what to ask.
And I think that's what's going to give this lawsuit a lot of weight, because it's not something subjective. It is something that is in writing by the ATF. They receive this kind of training. They sign. They agree to look for these red flags, as you said, and that is by law. So this lawsuit really, when you break it down in those terms, I mean, you could argue that it's pretty simple and pretty direct. There are other lawsuits in which something like this has happened in the past, and they've had success. There's one that is pending right now, and some of those red flags were not caught by the store which sold the weapon. And in this case, they not only say that they sold this weapon to someone who didn't know how to use it, didn't know what they wanted, the purpose described didn't match the weapon that he was asking for. Like, all of those are specific things, but also they upsold him accessories that, according to the lawsuit, were not necessary for someone who needs a weapon to protect their home.
The attorney in the press conference today, there were several of them spoken. You saw video of the press conference just a few minutes ago, but he said that this was predictable and preventable. He said those two words several times, and that's the point of this lawsuit, that things that should have been noticed were not noticed, were ignored, and that the gun store took profits over what was potentially the right thing to do.
Yeah, $760. So part of the things that they sold him were like a red light for accuracy and a grip for the gun and rounds of ammunition, which, okay, you want to protect your home. Do you need, 30 rounds? So do you need a red dot? And a point that the lawsuit makes, which I thought was honestly very clever, was that Connor Sturgeon, the shooter, told the clerk, made a comment about how expensive the gun was. And so they, in the lawsuit, they say, and also the fact that the detective found that he had never searched for this type of gun or accessories for the gun or the red dot or the handle that I mentioned. He never searched for those things.
He didn't know that those were options?
No.
Or that he could have...
Right. So then that further supports their claim that he didn't know what he wouldn't have known to ask for those things. The gun store upsold him.
Okay. And I want to make it clear that we did reach out to River City Firearms. We have not heard back from them. And of course, we're going to make another attempt to reach out to them to see if they have any comment about this lawsuit and the allegations brought towards them. We heard from Karen Tutt. you spoke with her
Mm.
yesterday. Heartbreaking to hear. Her husband, Jim, was one of the victims that was shot and killed that day. And, you know, I know that hearing her story and hearing how life is now for her, she went through the first of many without her husband, the first Christmas, the first New Year's, you know, she talked about how this loss is catastrophic. And I know she sat down with you yesterday to talk about
First time I had met her in person. And yeah, the loss is, it's unimaginable, right? She mentioned that her husband would always hug her and tell her every day how I adore you and I can't wait to come back home to you. And he walked out the door. And now fast forward to 9 months, and those words have taken on a completely different meaning because she said, now I'm the one who's going to come home to him in heaven, you know?
Yeah.
They were people of faith. Jim was very active with his church, and he even participated in missions. And but she recalled that day her son started calling her and asked her where Jim was, where his father was, and if he was at the bank. And she said, yes, he's in his normal meeting on Monday. And then she started calling him and he wouldn't answer. And she said, right away, I got nervous. From then, it's a whirlwind. It took 3 hours for her to find out that Jim had passed because of the chaos at the scene, at the hospital. So it was 3 agonizing hours. And it was really hard for her to do this interview.
Sure.
It wasn't something that she wanted to do. I could tell how nervous she was. We had another person who was supposed to do the interview as well. They backed out at the last minute, which I understand.
Understandable, yes.
Yeah. And I recognize that speaking about this is almost like it could either be a form of therapy, but it could also be rather traumatizing, right? To keep reliving this and the emotionality and the toll. But she said she feels like she has to do this because if she doesn't, then the pain is without a purpose. And through this lawsuit, by putting these gun stores on notice, like we are going to come after you financially, right? Perhaps criminally. There's another component of this that if these are federal regulations, could they face federal criminal charges? I don't know. But we're going to come after you. We're going to come after your store if you don't follow these regulations. And by that, she hopes then that other stores will take notice and do what they're supposed to do.
And another thing that they had mentioned, that this is not about infringing on American Second Amendment rights. This is just about noticing the red flags and then also responsible gun sales and just being more thorough when you're selling a weapon to someone.
Karen is very intelligent and she's well aware of the immediate sentiment from some people that say this is another attack on the Second Amendment.
Yeah, and we're seeing some of it online right now. And that's why I want to stress that that's what they had said several times, that this is not what this is about.
And I'm sure that, people who are listening to that right now and commenting, their eyes are probably rolling, right? Because I know that we hear that all the time. Well, this is not infringing on your rights. This is not infringing on the Second Amendment. When I would imagine they're saying, well, yes, it does. So here's the argument that Karen said. She is a gun supporter.
She said that in the press conference today.
Yes. She believes in the Second Amendment. She believes in the right of people to own firearms and protect themselves legally. She also believes, though, that with that great power and responsibility, or that great power, it should come with responsibility.
And accountability.
And accountability. And she made the reference or the analogy to a driver's license, right? Like a vehicle, you have to go through rigorous training and you have to pass a test. And, so she made that analogy, but she says she does support the Second Amendment. This is just about gun shops doing what they are already required to do.
Okay.
So she's not saying, we need to She's
not making up a law or making up a rule or a regulation. These are things that are already in place that she's saying were not enforced on April 4th when that weapon was sold to Connor Sturgeon at River City Firearms. So she wants accountability from the people who failed to notice those red flags.
And they've failed in the past. So also what was discovered was that this particular gun store, according to the lawsuit, had already been inspected by the ATF and found several violations for not filling out the federal paperwork correctly, by failing to properly investigate a convicted felon who was trying to buy a gun. There were other issues, and they issued the store a warning during the inspection. And they also identified, this is very interesting because we rarely get to see this from the ATF, but they also identified this place as a crime gun source.
So basically saying that if there were crimes out there, the guns were connected to being sold from that place.
Correct.
Interesting.
Correct.
Okay.
So you could argue, and these attorneys are arguing, that this gun store had a history of not following the rules, as evidenced by the ATF and their previous inspections, where they found all of these problems that was independent of anything to do with this lawsuit.
Okay. Another thing that you had mentioned in your story yesterday, when you broke this story, Natalia, that when we were talking about that witness in River City Firearms, the other person, customer purchasing, was in the store, noticed his odd behavior. She had actually said something to somebody else. I wonder if it was that kid in the store.
Yes.
It immediately clicked to her.
It just gave
chill. Yes, because it's just like, I can't imagine how that person felt when they put two and two together and they were like, wait a minute.
Yeah. And their name is not mentioned in the lawsuit. And you can imagine, the reasons why this witness wants to remain private. But she even said that when she saw this behavior at the store, she almost called police herself because she found it that suspicious. And when the shooting happened, just like you said, she turned to her husband and said, I wonder if it was that kid. And it was.
Wow. Okay. So a lot to go through today. We appreciate your efforts in bringing us this story, and especially hearing from the victims who, as she had said today, Karen Tatt had said today, she said her husband just went to work that day. And if it can happen to her, it can happen to anybody. And that's why she's doing this. And that kind of just broke my heart, because really she's heartbroken. And a lot of the victims that did survive were not at today's press conference because of the trauma that they still face. Dana Mitchell, someone read a statement on behalf of her. She talked about the sleepless nights, the loss of joy in her life, just how simple things like going to the grocery store, going to places where there are a lot of people, going to work, just has so many debilitating aspects of that, the impact of it. She said time will heal, but it certainly will take a lot of time.
And honestly, I hate to say this, but will it? Yeah. Do you ever really get over this? You don't.
You live, I think.
You learn to adjust.
You learn to learn with, she said in her statement, this is her new normal. And this is how she goes through life every day.
One of the things in speaking with some of the victims, I have interviewed another one of the people who died, his widow in the past. That was honestly one of the hardest, if not the hardest interview that I've ever done, because the pain was just so raw and honest and brutal. And I'm so appreciative to her for her honesty, but it was gut-wrenching. And I think one of the things that gets lost in, pro Second Amendment and gun laws, is the middle ground for the non-extreme, right? Everybody can agree that there's some people who should not have guns, whether they are convicted felons with a history of violent crime, or people who have known mental health issues.
And there are states that do have what they're called red flag laws.
Yes.
To kind of,
mitigate
all. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, even if you ask police, And officers, you would think officers would be like, huge Second Amendment. They are, but you talk to them and they say, hey, guess what? That guy who's got a history of assault, domestic violence, and assault in the first, which includes a shooting or two, probably should not have a gun. And there are places which this lawsuit alleges allows that to happen. And so that is where some of the victims are hoping that there is more commonality and less politics and this like inert reaction either on one side or on the other, and that something does happen and things like this could be avoided.
The attorneys that were involved today have experience with mass shootings, school shootings, the Uvalde, the nightclub shooting in Orlando. So they have experience. This is their what they focus on is dealing with the folks who are survivors and changing things. Their goal is to change things. So I appreciate your all's time today. Natalia, thank you for your time. I know you're so busy. Sean Batty was at today's press conference. He's going to have more for us throughout the day. And your interview that you did with Karen Tutt will also be sharing that.
And thank you to her for taking that on. She realizes the enormous toll that it's taking on her to be the face and to be the voice for the surviving families and for the surviving victims. Or the surviving survivors, let's say that, right? So a big thank you to her for coming forward.
She's
and
brave.
Yeah. And so, we hope that they can find some peace at some point in their lives, and we'll continue to follow this to see what happens with this lawsuit, if it's going to stick. I'm sure it's going to be a very long process.
Yes.
So we probably won't know for 3 years. But it's an interesting approach, and we'll see what happens.
All right. Thanks so much for your time, Natalia.
Yes.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.